Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear friends, I pray you're all well. Let's resume Al-Fatiha. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Sayyidina wa Maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Allahumma la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana. إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وامنحنا يا ربنا علما وعملا وقربا يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا وأكرمنا ولا تهنا وأعطنا ولا تحرمنا وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وأرضنا وارض عنا يا كريم. So we were last looking at the difference of opinion on the previous verse, whether it referred to Sayyidina Adam, and then passing on to his descendants who went into shirk, thereby contravening the promise Sayyidina Adam and Sayyidah Hawa radiallahu anhuma made, or alayhim wassalatu wassalam, or whether it was just talking about their offspring in general, or the offspring of people in general, whose ancestors were muwahidun, people who believed in tawheed, and then the offspring went into shirk. So now we have a few verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dismantles their shirk and just criticizes them. There's just severe criticism of them, the lack of intellect, lack of understanding in saying these things that were created literally by God. And then the forms that they make, the idols that they sculpt or carve out of something, is saying that they're God, or they're like God, or they're divine, or they deserve worship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala criticizes all that. So he says, أَيُشْرِكُونَ مَا لَا يَخْلُقُ شَيْئًا وَهُمْ يُخْلَقُونَ. Do they associate with Allah, associate in divinity with Allah, those idols which cannot create anything but are in fact created? So the question is a rhetorical question. It's in fact a criticism, and it's just showing tajheel, and it's just showing how foolish this idea is. So let's just look at the idea of shirk. Shirk means partnership. Sharika is a partnership in business. So shirk is a sort of partnership. And they're saying that there are others besides Allah who are divine. They have a partnership in divinity, that they are gods, which is just wrong by Islamic standards and by the truth. Or they have qualities that are divine. You know, people have said that about others in history, such as Jesus, alayhi salatu wasalam. That's also wrong. Or they're saying they deserve worship. Right? No one besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves worship, and no one should be worshipped besides Allah, God, right? Subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, Ayushrikun, are they, present tense again and again, every chance they get, right? They just go, they'll just make up their own gods. As we saw with some of the Sahaba, one of the Sahaba, his nephew, before he was a Muslim, his nephew kept taking his idol and throwing it in different places to make him see sense. And then one day he saw the idol had been thrown in a place, and a fox had urinated on it. And then he said, no, something that a fox can urinate on doesn't deserve worship. There's other cases with the Sahaba, like they would get dates and make it, make a little figure out of it and worship it. And then when times were hard and they couldn't afford much food, they just looked at the, at the idol and said, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. And then they ate it. And then later when Islam came, and then they opened their eyes and thought, wow, we were really wrong. What we did there. They saw the mistake in it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَيُشْرِكُونَ مَا لَا يَخْلُقُ شَيْئًا. Are they associating in divinity with Allah, saying this other thing is a God, this other thing deserves worship? Or are they associating in divinity with Allah? That, so I know in the translation he's said idols, but it is broad. whether is you're talking about the stars, whether you're talking about idols, whether you're talking about just concepts, whether you're talking about nature, whether you're talking about anything, right? Anything that doesn't create, are you associating in worship, in divinity with Allah? Those things that cannot create and are in fact themselves created, whilst they themselves are created. So it's one of the qualities that's necessary for a being to be divine, to be a God. And there's only one being like this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is to be able to create, right? These things haven't created anything and they're incapable of creating anything. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created everything. Well, you could say, well, how do you know it was Him? Well, He sent down a book, many books. He sent down books and He sent messengers. And the messengers said, this is what God is saying, that He created everything, and the proof is here. We have the proof of the Quran, the miracle of the Quran. But let's just look at, one of the miracles that's, beyond just the reading it from the text and seeing its miracle. Maraj al-Bahraini al-Taqiyan, He's merged the two seas, or made them float, towards each other. Bainahuma barzakhul la yabghiyan, that between them is a barrier that they can't cross. And there's many examples of this, where water either from a river and a sea, or two seas, that we can say today, yes, there's different, the composition of the water, the salt in one sea and is different to the amount in another sea. So there's a density in the water that doesn't make, so they don't osmosis doesn't occur, where both waters don't just merge into each other and blend into each other, becoming one. No, you can see this in many places where the sea is one color, and then the sea right next to it is a completely different color. How would the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who lived in Mecca, and he traveled to Syria, to, let's say, modern day Jordan, once, and then to Syria when he was 25 once, and I came back to Mecca and stayed there until this verse was revealed. How would he have known, right? People in his time, how would they have known? Okay, there were seafaring people in the time. Where did they go? Right? Did they go and find this reality? I highly doubt it. The Quran talks about the fetus, the development of the fetus in the womb, and before these advanced microscopes were developed, how could anyone know that these are the stages of the development of the fetus? There's so many things. So yes, God created everything, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He's proven it, right? So these things can't create anything. وَهُمْ يُخْلَقُونَ, they themselves are created. Why are they worshipping these idols when they themselves are the creation of some, the true God? So then he said, so once again the rhetorical question continues. So are they associating those in worshipping Allah? وَلَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ لَهُمْ نَصْرًا وَلَا أَنفُسَهُمْ يَنْصُرُونَ, when they're not even able to, not in the slightest, they don't have the ability to help them. Help is like, what's required when an enemy comes, when an opponent comes to harm someone, to push them back, to repel them, or to bring some sort of benefit, right? Help is of multiple types. So they can't bring any good into their life, and they can't repel any harm from them. So why are they worshipping these things? Why are they worshipping these idols that cannot even, in the most desperate times, when that's true worship, dua, when a person is desperate and you have no one else to turn to, who do you turn to besides Allah? And then so, if these people were absolutely desperate, in great need, would, if they turn to the idols, would they get any sort of benefit? No. And so then you could say, okay, well, maybe the idols won't, do anything for others, but can they help themselves? No. وَلَا أَنفُسَهُمْ يَنْصُرُونَ, and they can't even, their own selves, they can't help, right? As we saw with the story of the fox and the idol. They can't do anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that they just, these things are not even alive, they're inanimate, unworthy of worship. Why يأكلون خيره ويعبدون غيره, as Imam al-Bukhari says, yeah, in his Tafsir, that they eat the good, they consume the good of Allah, the good things that Allah gives them, and then they go off and worship someone else. So that's not fair, that's not good, right? And even these people, when they're in the most desperate situations, when they call out to them, can they be helped? No. Look at Abu Sufyan ibn Harb, fought the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for many years, and at the end of it, when he accepted Islam, on the day he accepted Islam, he said, yeah, La ilaha illallah, he believed that. He said that if there had been any other God, they would have done at least something for me by now, right? But he realized, look, there is no one else, it's just Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَإِن تَدْعُوهُمْ إِلَى الْهُدَى لَا يَتَّبِعُوكُمْ. And if you idolaters call upon them for guidance, they cannot respond to you. Or we can interpret that another way actually. سَوَاءٌ عَلَيْكُمْ أَدَعَوْتُمُوهُمْ أَمْ أَنْتُمْ صَامِتُونَ. It's all the same whether you call them or you remain silent. What's happening? So this is also another explanation of their ajz, their incapacity, the incapability to hear, to sense, to respond, to do anything, right? وَإِن تَدْعُوهُمْ إِلَى الْهُدَى, right? If you call them to guidance, right? If you call them to guide you, to show you, guidance is generally referring to religious guidance, but if you were to call them to show you a way to a particular place, or let's say even religious guidance, if you were to call on them to guide you, show me the truth and get me there, لا يتبعوكم, right? So actually that's what he said in the translation. But if you were to call them to, here, come to this is good, right? They can't respond. And then there's another qira'ah, لا يتبعوكم. They can't respond to you in the slightest or in any way, shape or form. If you call them to this, they can't do anything. They're incapable. The ajz, literally, it's just the incapacity. Like someone who's in a coma, can't get up and walk off. Like he just has the he's incapable of doing that in that situation. Right? So, and then he says, Sawa'un alaykum. Quite eloquent this. He said, it's the same. Right? It's the same, but the way it's expressed in Arabic, it doesn't use a verb, it uses the verbal noun. Sameness itself, right? It's not come across very articulate in the way I'm putting it, but these two situations are absolutely the same, or you could say four situations. They're absolutely exactly the أَدَعَوْتُمُوهُمْ أَمْ أَنْتُمْ صَامِتُونَ. Whether you call them or you are absolutely silent, right? These two situations are absolutely the same. So what he says, so he uses the verb أَدَعَوْتُمُوهُمْ, if you call them once, right? And then so Imam al-Biqai says that this verse has ihtibak. This verse is ihtibak, which basically means that you can say, interpret this in two ways. So he says, if you call them once, or if you were to repeatedly call them forever, keep going, right? Or if you were silent permanently, right? Or the fourth. So the same thing here, two interpretations: permanent silent or just silent once. What's being said here? So if you call them, come to anything good, anything that's right, we'll show you. They can't follow, they can't respond in any way, shape or form. So he says it's absolutely the same in all situations. If you were to call on them once or multiple times, come do this for me, or come here, or let's do this. And if you were to call, when do people call on God, right? When they have a need. So in the situation of state of great need, they'll be calling out, please come. He said it's the same whether someone stands there calling these idols and these false gods, repeatedly, or even just once, he just keeps calling them. It's the same if he does that, or if he just stands there silent, permanently silent. So there's one person calling them again and again and again, and then another person just stood there in front of the idols, silent, not saying a word, not interacting, not doing anything that would suggest that he's asking them for something. Both of these situations are exactly the same. Why? Because the beings who they're calling on, the beings, quote unquote, don't exist. They don't exist. Their representations, these idols that they have, cannot do anything. So why? Why do they call on them? They're not alive. They don't have any abilities. They don't have any power. They can't create anything. They can't change anything. They can't affect anything. They're just idols that they've made out of stone or wood, nothing more. Why are they worshipping them? What's worse is their worship entails turning their backs on their true creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then rejecting his books and rejecting his messengers and, turning away from the actual guidance that he's given. Why would they do that? Right? So it's the same for these people. Whether it says it's the same for you, whether you call on them or if you remain absolutely silent. You'll get the same response. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Right? Very powerful. And then he says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ عِبَادٌ أَمْثَالُكُمْ. These idols you invoke besides Allah are created beings like yourself. فَدْعُوهُمْ فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. So call on them and and see if they will answer you if your claims are true. So nominal sentence starting with inna, connected to the previous verse. So he's saying, let's continue that topic. And he says, inna, highly emphasize, clearly those who you call on, those who you repeatedly call on. Right? When do they call on them? Out of desperation, when they're absolutely desperate, and when they need help and these sorts of things, when they want things. Those who you repeatedly call on, min dunillah, besides Allah, but he also indicates by using the word dun that they're much lower than him, and using the supreme name that he is the all perfect, supreme, absolutely, perfectly divine king. I'm running out of words. Our words can't even express the greatness and majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That he is the supreme being, right? That being, and those who you call on repeatedly, once mistake, but no, even once is not excused. But anyway, again and again and again, besides Allah, those who are far below Allah, right? They don't even exist, right? Ibadun amthalukum. They're slaves, just like you. And slaves in the sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expresses it like this: you're desperate and you're in need, so you call on them, and you and they are exactly the same. Just like you're unable, for example, to fix the problems that come into your life, that's why you call on, God or gods, they're gods. They are completely unable, just like you, to fix them for you. So just like your slaves, dependent on your master, they are slaves, incapable, would be dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't even exist. Right? That's the simplest thing. So it's very, very eloquent way of putting it. So then he says, فَدْعُوهُمْ. Go on then, call on them. Go on then, if you're so insistent. If you insist they exist, call on them. فَدْعُوهُمْ is a challenge. Call on them. فَدْعُوهُمْ فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لَكُمْ. Let them answer you then. right? So it's really it's like a command to the idols, but the idols can't respond to that command, can they? If you're someone alive, you say, fine, okay, I will, but the idols can't. So it's like further criticism of these pagans, like, what are you even worshipping? Go and call on them, let's see what you get, let's see what response you get. Nothing will happen. In kuntum sadiqeen, if you're true that they're alive or they exist and they really deserve worship, prove it, do it, call on them, let them respond, but they can't. So then he, once again, after this, it's been really eloquent so far, as with, all verses, but these arguments are just flowing and they just appeal to the human mind that, yeah, you know what, this Tawheed idea makes sense, it fits in my heart, it resonates with my soul. Whereas this other thing of idolatry or worshipping something else besides Allah, it just doesn't make sense, right? And then there's no leap of faith. There's just, logic that, that once you use your mind in logic to understand what God is saying, and when you establish, yes, God knows more and He exists, and Allah, you worship Allah, la ilaha illallah, and what He's told us to worship and do, Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then you leave your brain and you accept, whatever comes, right? None of it contradicts. It's not self-contradictory. Right? So he says, like, if you look at the belief of Islam, the aqaidah, the tenets that we believe in, it all makes sense perfectly. You don't have to do it. There's no, logical gymnastics or loopholes you have to, try and get around. It just makes sense. So then he says, Alahum arjulun yamshuna biha. Do they have feet to walk with? Alahum aydin yabtishuna biha, or hands to hold with? Am lahum aydin yabtishuna biha. Am lahum a'yunun yubsiruna biha, or eyes to see with? Am lahum adhanun yasma'una biha, or ears to hear with? قل ادعوا شركاءكم ثم كيدوني فلا تنظرون. Say, call your partners, your associate gods, and conspire against me without delay. فلا تنظرون. Don't wait. And so here, what's happening in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us a repetition of a statement, a style of questioning. Alahum, alahum, alahum. Do they have? Do they have? Do they have? It's repeated quite deliberately, although I know it's implied in the translation. But the repetition of it, an explicit statement of it in the verse, is very strong, because the repetition of the question drives the matter home. Criticism after criticism after criticism, emphasis after emphasis after emphasis. These things cannot do anything for you. He says, Alahum arjulun yamshuna biha. Do they have feet that they walk with? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we say Allah is unlike anything in existence, right? Absolutely unique. But so how do you understand the question? If he's saying that if he doesn't have feet, right, subhanahu wa ta'ala, then why are we negating them for the idols? And the idols may have feet in their form. Feet are a means of movement, right? And he's saying, do they have feet and legs that they can walk with to go places, to do things for you? Or are they completely incapable? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is transcendent, beyond anything our minds can imagine. Yet He is capable of doing absolutely anything, right? So the means that they would require if they were alive don't apply to Him, because He can do everything, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, do they have legs or do they have feet that they walk with? Right? So they can go to this place, go to that place, come to your aid when you need it. Clearly not. Rhetorical question. Clearly not. Even if they make feet on the idols, can they walk with them? Are they real feet? Do they have the volition and the will and the ability to move their feet, one foot in front of the other to move? No. Right? Am lahum aydin yabtishuna biha, or do they have hands that they can grip something with and seize it with, right? Or hold it. Batsh is to hold something with force, right? Do they have hands that they can grab something with? Absolutely not. Even if they made a little shape of it, can their hands actually do that? Can they stop anything? Can they hold anything? Can they give them something? Can they move things? Can they do anything for the idolaters? Absolutely not. أَمْ لَهُمْ أَعْيُنٌ يُبْصِرُونَ بِهَا. Or do they have eyes that they see things with? Right? You know, when you can see something, you know, you understand, you can, well, that's a separate thing as well, but you know, seeing things allows a person to be aware. Allah knows absolutely anything and everything, right? He knows absolutely everything. And the idols don't have this capacity. If you were to throw something at the idol, it can't see what's coming at it, so in order to move and defend itself. So why? You know, and then أَمْ لَهُمْ آذَانٌ يَسْمَعُونَ بِهَا. Do they have ears that they can hear with, that they hear your calls with when you call on them, asking for protection, asking for help, asking for the things that you want? Allah knows everything, He sees everything, He hears everything in a way that befits His perfection and majesty. These things, how many a time is it, you know, me in my life, everyone I know of the believers, you have an issue and you call on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers, right? And you know, the answer comes in different ways. Sometimes harm is pushed aside, sometimes it's saved for the akhirah, but there's been more than one occasion in this life where, oh Allah, you know, I've called for something and you know, it's happened. Like that. I used to study with this scholar. He had a bit of a temper, and anyway, there were times I didn't prepare for the class, or it was just things were on, and I'd say, oh Allah, please cancel the class. And then I'd get a call from the teacher, yeah, Abdul-Rahim, no class today. I was like, yes, or next time, Shaykh, we'll have a class, right? You know, but you know, you call on God and Allah does things. They can't do anything like this. And when Allah did things for them, they describe it to the idols, right? So He says, Ud'u, qul, say, O messenger, to drive this point home for them, قُلْ ادْعُوا شُرَكَاءَكُمْ. Call on these associate gods, these gods who you say are divine with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ثُمَّ كِيدُونِي. Get them involved in your plan, and then plan, you know, conspire against me, make a plan to harm me. He wasn't scared, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The idols don't exist. And if the idolaters had a plan, Allah was his protector. Nothing, no harm could come to him. And we'll see in the next verse after this, إِنَّ وَلِيِّ اللَّهُ الَّذِي نَزَّلَ الْكِتَابَ, that my protector is Allah who revealed the book. But we'll talk about this with that. But he's saying, look here, do this then. Right? If you think that you really have these idols and you know you're right and they can do something, okay, fine. I'm criticizing them, like your worship of them, and your showing you the error and the folly of your ways. Okay, clearly you won't like it, but come at me. Right, you know, do what you can with your idols to harm me. And he knew nothing would happen because Allah is his protector and the idols don't exist. Right, so what was this? This wasn't malicious to harm them. Rather, it was to wake up. You exist. There's a true Lord, true Creator who's made you, and you're in a test. And at the end of it, there's one of two destinations. One of absolute joy and delight forever, and the other one where there's punishment, and what you're doing is a crime according to this Lord. So fix things up before you end up suffering that punishment. So he's doing them a favor, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a warner, as we said earlier. So let's stop here and we'll carry on from the next verse, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.